There's a specific kind of arrogance that comes with a shiny suit and a brand new German SUV, the kind that rolls onto a gravel road like it's doing the dirt a favor just by driving on it. And I saw that arrogance firsthand on a crisp Tuesday morning in October, the kind of morning where the frost is just starting to melt off the fence posts and the air smells like sage and old pine. I was sitting on my porch, nursing a black coffee, watching the sun crest over the ridge of the Thorn Valley Ranch, 85 acres of dust, memories, and hard-earned peace that my great-grandfather staked out back in the 1890s, and I was thinking about how quiet it was, how finally, after a lifetime of noise, I had silence, until I saw that black Mercedes G-Wagon slow down at my main gate. I watched, curious more than anything, as a woman stepped out. She was dressed like she was heading to a boardroom in Manhattan, not a cattle ranch in Wyoming, sharp heels, sharper blazer, and she didn't just look at my gate, she opened it. She actually unlatched the chain, swung it wide, and waved a second car, a sedan with a confused-looking couple inside, right onto my land. Now, in this part of the country, opening another man's gate without permission is about as polite as spitting in his soup, so I set my coffee down, grabbed my hat, and climbed into my old beat-up pickup truck to drive down the lane and see exactly what kind of misunderstanding was happening. As I pulled up, I rolled down the window, and I heard her voice, loud and projecting, carrying over the wind. And here we have the lower pasture, excellent drainage, perfect for the equestrian center we discussed, and the farmhouse. Well, it's a teardown, obviously, but the footprint allows for a magnificent estate. I slammed the truck door shut, hard enough to make the couple jump, and said, "Excuse me, folks, but unless you're here to buy a few bales of hay, you are trespassing, and I'm going to have to ask you to turn around." The woman spun on her heels, and she gave me this look of utter annoyance, like I was the gardener who had spoken out of turn. She adjusted her glasses, walked right up to me, and said, "Sir, please don't interrupt. I am Vanessa Sterling with Pinnacle Horizon Realty, and I am showing this property to the Harrisons, so if you could please return to your duties, we'll be done shortly." I stared at her, and for a second, I almost laughed because the audacity was just so breathtaking. "Lady," I said, keeping my voice low, "I own this ranch. My name is Elias Thorne, and this property is not for sale, has never been for sale, and won't be for sale until they bury me in the back lot." The couple, the Harrisons, looked at each other, clearly uncomfortable. But Vanessa, she didn't even blink. She just reached into her designer bag, pulled out a thick file folder, and smirked. "Oh, you must be the squatter, or perhaps a distant relative who didn't get the memo. I assure you, Mr. Thorne, this property was legally purchased last month from the owner of record, a Mr. Silas Thorne." My blood ran cold, not because I was scared, but because I knew my family tree better than I knew the back of my hand. And there was no Silas Thorne, never had been, never would be. "There is no Silas Thorne," I said, stepping closer. "I am the sole owner. I have the deed in a safe deposit box, and you are standing on private property holding a piece of fiction." She sighed, a dramatic, theatrical sigh, and handed me a document. "Read it and weep, old man. The sale is recorded, the title is transferred, and as the representative for the new owners, I am giving you a courtesy 30-day notice to vacate. Though honestly, if you keep harassing my clients, I can have the sheriff remove you by tonight." I looked at the paper, and it looked real, terrifyingly real, official seals, stamps, signatures that looked vaguely like mine, but not quite, and right there at the bottom, a transfer from Silas Thorne to a holding company called Vantage Point Ventures. I looked up at her, and I saw the glint in her eyes, the predator looking at the prey, and she thought she had me. She thought she was looking at a dusty old rancher who didn't know a tort from a tart, who would fold under the pressure of big words and legal threats. But here's the thing Vanessa Sterling didn't know, the one detail she hadn't bothered to check in her little background search. Before I retired to this ranch 2 years ago, I wasn't a farmer. I spent 40 years in Chicago as a senior litigation specialist for high-stakes real estate fraud. I didn't just read contracts, I destroyed them. I spent 4 decades eating sharks like her for breakfast. I pulled out my phone, dialed a number, and said, "Sheriff Miller? Yeah, it's Elias. I've got a situation at the main gate. I need you down here, and bring a notepad, because we've got a fraud in progress." Vanessa laughed. Go ahead. Call the police. They can help you pack. 15 minutes later, Sheriff Buck Miller rolled up, lights flashing. Buck and I went way back. We played poker on Thursdays, and he knew this land was mine as surely as he knew his own name. He stepped out, tipped his hat to me, and looked at Vanessa. Ma'am, Mr. Thorne says you're claiming ownership of this land? I have the deed right here, she said, thrusting the papers at him with that same arrogant confidence. Buck took them, looked them over, scratched his chin, and said, well, these sure look fancy, but there's a problem, see. In this county, all property transfers have to be notarized with a raised seal. And this is a flat ink stamp. Looks like it's from 2 counties over. And frankly, I had dinner with Elias last night, and he didn't mention selling his legacy to a shell company. He handed the papers back to her. Now, until a judge tells me otherwise, the county records I see on my computer say Elias Thorne owns this dirt. So I'm going to ask you and your clients to leave before I write you up for criminal trespass. The Harrisons were already in their car, backing away, wanting no part of this, and Vanessa, her face turned a shade of red that clashed with her lipstick, snatched the papers back and hissed at me. You think this is over? You think having a small-town cop in your pocket saves you? We have lawyers who cost more an hour than your truck is worth. You'll be hearing from us. She got in her G-Wagon and peeled out, spraying gravel all over my boots. I watched her go, and the adrenaline started to fade, replaced by a cold, heavy realization that this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a clerical error. This was a targeted attack. Someone had gone to the trouble of forging documents, creating a fake identity, and setting up a shell company. I went into my barn, which I'd converted into my office, and I dusted off my old skills. I logged into the county tax portal, and my heart sank. Someone had altered the digital records. My middle name, Edward, had been changed to Edmund in the system. Just a tiny tweak, enough to create confusion, enough to justify a correction deed later on. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting a realtor, I was fighting a machine. I called my old contact in the city, a private investigator named Sarah, who could find a needle in a haystack if the needle was using a VPN, and I told her to look into Vantage Point Ventures. While she dug, I went to see Old Man Fletcher, the town notary. He's been stamping papers since the Nixon administration, and his office smells like dust and peppermint. Fletcher, I asked, sliding the photocopy of the fake deed I'd snapped a picture of across his desk. You recognize this stamp? Fletcher squinted, adjusted his spectacles, and frowned. That's not local, Elias. And look at the date. September 31st? 30 days hath September, April, June, and November. Whoever forged this was sloppy, or they think we're stupid. They think we're stupid, I said. Fletcher, has anyone been in here asking about my ranch? He nodded slowly. Matter of fact, yeah. A woman came in a few weeks back, tall, blonde, fancy suit, asked to pull the historical water rights records for the valley, spent 3 hours copying everything related to your creek. Water rights. It hit me like a physical blow. See, in the West, water is more valuable than gold, and my ranch sits on top of the Ogallala Aquifer with senior water rights dating back to 1893, rights that allow me to draw water even when the rest of the state is dry. That evening, Sarah called me back. Elias, you're not going to believe this. Vantage Point Ventures is a shell company registered in Delaware, but the breadcrumbs lead back to a holding firm owned by Julian Prescott. Julian Prescott, the name was like a curse word in the development world. He was a billionaire developer known for building ultra-luxury eco-resorts in places where locals couldn't afford to live anymore. He was a shark who didn't just swim in the ocean, he drained it. He's planning something big, Elias, Sarah said. I found permits filed under another name for a massive resort complex in your county. Golf courses, man-made lakes, spas. And the only way they can get the water for all that green grass in the middle of a drought is if they own your aquifer access. It all made sense. The fake relative, the rush to evict, they didn't just want my land, they needed my water, and without it, their $100 million project was just a pile of dry dust. The next few days were a nightmare of escalation. I started seeing drones hovering over my property line, buzzing like angry hornets, mapping every inch of my land. I caught a survey crew trying to stake out my north pasture, and when I confronted them, they waved a preliminary access order that looked as fake as a $3 bill. But the real blow came on a Thursday night. I was sleeping, or trying to, with a baseball bat next to the bed, when my security system chirped. I'd installed cameras everywhere after the first visit, and I looked at the monitor to see a shadow moving in my barn office. I didn't call the sheriff, not yet. I grabbed my shotgun, unloaded, just for the sound it makes, and crept out the back door. I watched through the window as a man in black tactical gear rifled through my filing cabinets. He wasn't stealing tools or equipment. He was photographing documents. He was looking for the original deed, looking for anything he could use to challenge my claim. I racked the shotgun, the CHK sound echoing in the night air like a thunderclap. The guy froze, looked out the window right at me, and bolted. He scrambled out the side door and sprinted into the dark, jumping into a waiting car that sped off without lights. I didn't chase him. I didn't need to, because I had caught his face on 4K video, and more importantly, I had seen who was driving the getaway car. It was Vanessa Sterling. They were getting desperate, breaking and entering meant they were on a timeline, meant the investors were breathing down their necks, and they needed my land secured now. The next morning, I went on the offensive. I met with Olivia, a local reporter who had been sniffing around the strange property sales in the county. She was young, hungry, and hated bullies. "This is bigger than just you, Elias," she told me over coffee at the diner. "I found 3 other ranches that sold in the last 6 months to shell companies, all below market value. All the owners were elderly, some with dementia. Rumors are they were pressured, told they had tax liens that didn't exist. They're preying on the vulnerable," I said, my grip tightening on the mug. "They think I'm just another old man to be steamrolled." "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to set a trap," I said. "I'm going to give them exactly what they want." I went home and called Vanessa Sterling. I put a tremor in my voice. I sounded tired, beaten, scared. "Ms. Sterling," I said, I can't do this anymore, the break-in, the drones. I'm too old for this fight. If I agree to sign over the quitclaim deed, will you leave me alone? Will you give me a fair price?" She practically purred through the phone. "Oh, Mr. Thorne, I think that is a very wise decision. Fighting progress is exhausting, isn't it? Mr. Prescott himself is in town. He'd love to meet you personally to handle the transition, say, tomorrow at noon? At your ranch." "Tomorrow is fine," I whispered. "Just bring the check." The next day, the circus came to town. A convoy of 3 black SUVs rolled up my driveway, kicking up dust, looking like a presidential motorcade. Julian Prescott stepped out of the lead car, and he looked exactly like his pictures, slick back hair, a suit that cost more than my tractor, and a smile that was all teeth. Vanessa was right beside him, looking triumphant, holding a leather binder. I sat on my porch in my rocking chair, a blanket over my knees to look frail, my dog Buster sleeping at my feet. "Mr. Thorne," Julian said, walking up the steps without being invited. "It's a pleasure to finally meet the man of the hour. Beautiful property you have here. Shame it's been so underutilized." "It's my home," I mumbled, looking at the floorboards. Of course," Julian said, dismissing my life's work with a wave of his hand. "But imagine what it will be, a world-class resort, bringing jobs and wealth to this quaint little community. You're doing a service, really." Vanessa opened the binder and laid a document on the small porch table. "Sign here, Mr. Thorne. This acknowledges that the previous transfer from Silas Thorne was legitimate and that you are vacating any residual claim. In exchange, Mr. Prescott has authorized a payment of $2 million. $2 million. The land, with the water rights, was worth 20, easy. And the other document?" I asked, pointing to a second paper. "The one about the water?" "Just a formality," Julian said, leaning in. "Transferring the aquifer access, standard stuff." "You know," I said, my voice still shaky. "I was looking at my grandfather's journals last night. He wrote about the drought in the 30s, how this water saved half the county." "Fascinating," Julian said, checking his watch. "Sign, please." "And I was thinking," I continued, "about Silas Thorne." Vanessa stiffened. "What about him?" "I was wondering how you got his signature," I said, looking up, and I let the tremor drop from my voice completely. I sat up straight, shed the blanket, and looked Julian Prescott dead in the eye with the cold, hard stare of a litigator who has just cornered a witness. "Because, see, I invented the name Silas Thorne 40 years ago as a trap on a dummy deed to catch a title fraudster back in Chicago. The name doesn't exist on any birth certificate, any census, or any tax roll, except the one fake document I planted in the county archives as a honeypot. The silence on that porch was heavy enough to crush a man. Julian's smile vanished. What are you talking about? I'm saying. I stood up, crossing my arms, that the only way you could have bought this land from Silas Thorne is if you forged the documents based on a trap I set before you were born. You didn't buy this land, you counterfeited it. This is ridiculous, Vanessa stammered, grabbing the binder. We're leaving, the deal is off. Sit down. I barked, and the command in my voice made her freeze. You're not going anywhere, I said, because while you were parking your fancy cars, my friend Sheriff Miller and a few agents from the State Attorney General's office were getting comfortable in my kitchen. The front door opened, and Buck stepped out, followed by 3 men in windbreakers that said state investigator. Julian Prescott, Buck said, you have the right to remain silent, though I really hope you don't, because I'm dying to hear how you explain the bribery, the forgery, and the racketeering. Julian turned pale, looking from me to the cops, realizing the trap had snapped shut. This is entrapment. You let me hear. I invited you to a business meeting, I said, smiling. You're the one who brought the fraudulent contracts. Vanessa tried to run, actually tried to sprint for the SUV, but she made it about 3 steps before a deputy blocked her path. The look on her face, the shattering of her entire world, was something I'll never forget. We spent the rest of the afternoon collecting evidence. They had brought everything with them. The laptops, the original forged deeds, the communication logs with the corrupt notary, thinking they were just coming to close a deal with a senile old man. They had hand-delivered the entire case against themselves. The fallout was spectacular. The story broke the next day, thanks to Olivia, billionaire developer caught in rancher's trap. It turned out my ranch was just the tip of the iceberg. Investigators found a dozen other properties across 3 states that Prescott and his team had stolen using similar methods: fake relatives, shell companies, intimidation. Because of the evidence we gathered at my ranch, the dominoes fell fast. The class action lawsuit was massive. Vanessa Winters cut a deal. She testified against Julian to save her own skin, admitting to the forgery, the bribery of the county clerk to alter the tax records, and the break-in. She got 5 years in federal prison, and she'll never sell a doghouse again, let alone a ranch. Julian Prescott fought it, of course, with his army of lawyers, but it's hard to argue with video evidence of you admitting to the fraud on a rancher's porch. He was convicted of racketeering, wire fraud, and grand larceny. He was sentenced to 15 years, and his company was liquidated to pay restitution to the families he'd stolen from. As for the resort, it never happened. The water rights remained with the land, where they belong. A few months later, I was sitting on that same porch, drinking coffee, watching the snow fall on the ridge, looking out over the land that was still mine, safe and sound. I realized something then. These people, the Julians and the Vanessas of the world, they think power comes from money. They think they can buy reality, rewrite history, and erase people just because they have a checkbook. But they forget that there's a different kind of power, the power of knowing who you are, of knowing your history, and of standing your ground when the wolves come knocking. They thought they were dealing with a simple rancher, and they were, but they forgot that a rancher is just a man who refuses to be moved. And they definitely forgot to check the resume. So, to anyone out there watching this, if someone shows up at your door trying to tell you that you don't own what's yours, don't panic, don't fold. Dig your heels in. Check the paperwork. And never, ever underestimate the power of a grumpy old man with a background in forensic law. I'm curious, have any of you ever had a fight for your home? Have you ever dealt with a bully in a suit who wouldn't take no for an answer? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one of them. Thanks for watching. Folks, stay safe, stay sharp, and keep your gates locked.